The blood trail led straight to Martha Henderson's doorstep, dark droplets gleaming like scattered rubies in the harsh Texas sun. She stood frozen in her doorway, clutching a Winchester rifle that suddenly felt heavier than a millstone, watching as 50 Comanche warriors materialized from the morning mist like vengeful spirits. Their war paint caught the early light, transforming familiar plains into a theater of potential death. At their head rode a man whose presence commanded the very air itself, Chief Running Bear, his obsidian eyes scanning her modest homestead with the intensity of a hawk studying its prey. Just 12 hours earlier, Martha had made a choice that now seemed either divinely inspired or catastrophically foolish. The wounded Comanche boy lay behind her kitchen door, his fevered breathing the only sound breaking the terrible silence that stretched between her world and theirs. She could feel his father's gaze boring into her soul, weighing her worthiness to live another day. The story had begun 3 days prior when Martha first heard the distant gunshots echoing across the rolling grasslands of eastern Texas. Living alone on the Henderson spread since her husband Tom's death 2 winters past, she'd grown accustomed to the sounds of frontier life. The howl of coyotes, the thunder of wild mustangs, the crack of settlers' rifles bringing down game. But these shots carried a different rhythm, a desperate staccato that spoke of running battles in mortal fear. Martha was hanging laundry behind her cabin when she spotted the dust cloud rising from the creek bottom a mile east. Through Tom's old spyglass, she watched a scene that would haunt her for years to come. A small band of Comanche warriors was being pursued by what looked like 20 Texas Rangers, their blue uniforms stark against the golden prairie grass. The chase had the feel of a hunt, not a battle, and Martha's stomach twisted as she realized she was witnessing something far uglier than a fair fight. The Rangers had modern repeating rifles and fresh horses. The Comanche warriors, probably a hunting party caught far from their main camp, were clearly outnumbered and outgunned. Through the spyglass, Martha watched in horror as one by one, the proud warriors fell to Ranger bullets. The last warrior, a man whose bearing suggested leadership, fought with desperate courage to protect something precious, a small figure clinging to his horse's neck. When that final warrior's mount stumbled and went down, Martha saw the child thrown clear, tumbling into a stand of mesquite brush near the creek. The Rangers, apparently satisfied with their grim work, gathered their trophies and rode north toward Fort Richardson, leaving the battlefield littered with the dead. They never saw the small figure crawling deeper into the thorny refuge of the mesquite. Martha had lived on the frontier long enough to know that wisdom demanded she stay clear of such troubles. Comanche raids had claimed neighbors and friends over the years, including her own brother-in-law just last spring. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to bar her doors and pretend she'd seen nothing. But as afternoon shadows grew long, and she imagined a wounded child alone in that hostile wilderness, her conscience began its relentless assault on her common sense. Tom Henderson had been many things: a dreamer, a terrible businessman, a man too gentle for the harsh realities of frontier life, but he'd possessed an unwavering moral compass that had guided their marriage for 15 years. Even now, 2 years after consumption claimed him, Martha could hear his voice as clearly as if he stood beside her. A child is a child, Martha. Color of skin don't change that fundamental truth. As twilight painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Martha made her decision. She saddled Tom's old gelding, loaded her medical supplies into saddlebags, and rode toward the creek bottom with her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The battlefield was a scene from her worst nightmares. Brave men cut down in their prime, their blood darkening the thirsty earth. But she pressed on, following instinct and prayer toward the mesquite thicket. She found him just as full darkness claimed the land. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old, his small body racked with fever and pain from a bullet wound high in his shoulder. His dark eyes, bright with intelligence despite his suffering, watched her approach with the wariness of a wounded animal. He tried to crawl away when she reached for him, but weakness betrayed his courage. Martha had delivered 3 babies and nursed Tom through his final illness, but she'd never faced anything like this. The boy spoke no English, and her knowledge of Comanche was limited to the few trading words most settlers picked up over the years. Communication would have to flow through gentleness and action rather than words. The ride back to her cabin became an exercise in pure faith, The child's body burned with fever as she held him across her saddle, his labored breathing punctuated by soft moans that tore at her heart. Every shadow might hide Comanche warriors coming to reclaim their own. Every distant sound might herald her death. Yet she pressed on, driven by something deeper than fear or wisdom. Back in her kitchen, working by lamplight, Martha cleaned and dressed the boy's wound with the same care she would have shown her own child. The bullet had passed clean through his shoulder, missing bone and major blood vessels by the narrowest of margins. She fed him broth when he could manage it, bathed his fevered brow with cool water, and sang the lullabies she'd once hoped to sing to children of her own. Through that long night, as she dozed fitfully in a chair beside the makeshift sickbed, Martha found herself remembering things she'd tried to forget. The Comanche raid 5 years past that had taken the Morrison children from their farm just 10 miles south. The stories of torture and captivity that had fueled nightmares across the territory. The deep, abiding hatred that existed between her people and his, fed by generations of violence and mutual incomprehension. Yet looking at this child, this small, vulnerable human being fighting for life in her kitchen, those old hatreds seemed as distant as winter thunder. His face, relaxed in fever dreams, could have belonged to any boy in any frontier town. His courage, even wounded and afraid, commanded respect. His very presence in her home challenged every assumption she'd carried about his people. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the sound that had haunted Martha's dreams for years, the thunder of many horses approaching at speed. She rose from her chair with joints stiff from the night's vigil and moved to her front window. What she saw there made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. They came like a force of nature itself, 50 Comanche warriors in full battle array, their horses' hooves drumming a rhythm that seemed to shake the very earth. War paint transformed familiar human features into masks of divine retribution. Eagle feathers danced in the morning breeze. Lances and rifles caught the early sunlight, transforming weapons into instruments of terrible beauty. At their head rode a man who commanded attention through sheer presence alone. Chief Running Bear, though Martha didn't yet know his name, sat his warhorse like a conqueror from another age. His bare chest bore scars that spoke of countless battles survived, countless enemies defeated. His eyes, dark as winter nights, held the accumulated wisdom and fury of a people pushed to the edge of extinction. Martha's hands shook as she checked her rifle, knowing with crystal clarity that it would prove useless against such odds. Behind her, the boy stirred restlessly, his fever breaking at last, consciousness beginning to return. The cosmic joke wasn't lost on her. After nursing him through the worst of his crisis, she might not live to see him fully recover. The warriors arranged themselves in a perfect semicircle around her cabin, blocking every avenue of escape. Their discipline was flawless, their silence more terrifying than war cries might have been. They simply waited, patient as death itself, while their chief rode forward alone. Running Bear stopped his horse just 20 feet from Martha's front porch, close enough that she could see the intelligence burning in his eyes, the controlled fury of a father who had spent 3 days searching for his missing son. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "Woman, you have something that belongs to me." The words hung in the air between them like a blade balanced on its edge. Martha felt the weight of 50 pairs of eyes upon her, measuring her worth, waiting for her response. Behind her, she heard the boy stirring, calling out weakly in Comanche. The sound seemed to electrify the waiting warriors, confirming what they already knew. Martha stepped onto her porch, still clutching her rifle but keeping it pointed toward the ground. Her voice, when she found it, came out steadier than she'd dared hope. "Your son is hurt bad. Been nursing him through fever for 3 days now. Bullet wound in his shoulder." Running Bear's expression didn't change, but she caught something flickering in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she'd cared for rather than killed his child. He swung down from his horse with fluid grace, and Martha had to steel herself not to retreat as he approached. Up close, his presence was overwhelming, like standing too near a lightning strike. "Why?" The single word carried the weight of genuine puzzlement. "Why did you not let him die? Why risk the anger of his people?" The question went to the heart of everything Martha had wrestled with through the long night. Why indeed? Self-preservation should have dictated leaving the boy where she found him. Fear should have sent her fleeing in the opposite direction. Prejudice, carefully cultivated by years of frontier violence, should have hardened her heart against his suffering. "Because he's a child," she said finally, the words coming from some deep well of truth she hadn't known she possessed. "Just a child, hurt and scared and needing help. That's all I could see when I found him." Something shifted in Running Bear's face, so subtle she might have imagined it. But when he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, not softer exactly, but more complex, layered with emotions she couldn't quite identify. "Many of your people would have killed him, counted it as justice for raids, for deaths, for old grievances." Martha nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She knew he was right. Most settlers would have seen the boy as either a future threat to be eliminated or a trophy to be turned over to the army. Her choice to heal rather than harm marked her as either saint or fool, depending on perspective. "May I see him?" Running Bear asked, and the quiet request carried more weight than any demand might have. Martha led him inside, intensely aware of his presence filling her small kitchen like a gathering storm. The boy lay on the makeshift bed she'd prepared, his fever finally broken, his breathing easier. When he saw his father, tears began streaming down his young face, and he spoke rapidly in Comanche, explanations, apologies, expressions of relief and joy. Running Bear knelt beside his son, his large hands gentle as they examined Martha's bandaging work. He spoke softly to the boy, his voice carrying tones of infinite tenderness that seemed impossible coming from such a fearsome warrior. The love between father and son was so obvious, so universal, that Martha felt tears pricking her own eyes. After a long moment, Running Bear rose and turned to face her. The hostility hadn't entirely left his expression, but it had been joined by something else. Respect, perhaps, or at least the recognition that she had earned the right to be heard. "My son tells me you sang to him through the fever, that you fed him when he was too weak to eat alone, that you treated him as you would your own child." Martha nodded, not sure if she was being praised or condemned. "I did what needed doing, what anyone should have done." "But they would not have," Running Bear said with certainty. "Your people and mine have spilled too much blood for such mercy to come easily. Yet you chose healing over hatred. Why?" The question kept coming back to that fundamental choice, the moment when she could have turned away and chosen safety over conscience. Martha found herself thinking of Tom again, of the man who had taught her that character was revealed not in easy times, but in moments of moral crisis. "My husband used to say that hate was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die," she said quietly. "I've seen too much death, too much suffering on both sides. When I found your boy, I couldn't add to it, couldn't be part of the killing anymore." Running Bear was quiet for a long time, his dark eyes studying her face as if trying to read the truth written there. Outside, Martha could hear the restless stamping of horses, the soft murmur of warriors waiting for their chief's decision. Her life hung in the balance of whatever judgment he was forming. 3 years ago," he said finally, "my village was attacked by soldiers in the night. Women and children killed in their sleep. My wife died trying to protect the little ones. I swore that day to show your people the same mercy they showed mine." The pain in his voice was raw, immediate, and Martha understood with perfect clarity how close she stood to death. This man had every reason to hate her kind, every justification for revenge. That she still drew breath was a miracle she couldn't fully comprehend. "But," Running Bear continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "my son lives because you chose mercy when you could have chosen hatred. This changes things between us, creates a debt that must be acknowledged." He moved to the window, gazing out at his waiting warriors. When he turned back to Martha, his expression had shifted again, becoming almost ceremonial in its gravity. "I cannot erase the blood between our peoples, cannot undo the wrongs on both sides or promise that this war will end tomorrow. But I can honor what you have done here, can ensure that your mercy is repaid with mercy." He called out in Comanche to his warriors, and Martha heard the sound of horses moving, of weapons being lowered. When he turned back to her, something approaching a smile touched his lips. You will not be harmed. Your home will be protected. Any Comanche warrior who raises his hand against Martha Henderson will answer to Running Bear himself. The words carried the weight of absolute authority, and Martha felt tears of relief threatening to overwhelm her composure. But Running Bear wasn't finished. More than this, he continued, you will be known among my people as one who chose the path of healing. In our councils, your name will be spoken with respect. Your actions here today will be remembered in our stories, passed down to children not yet born. The boy, his son, spoke up from the bed, his voice weak but determined. Running Bear listened intently, then nodded with evident pride. He says to tell you that you have the heart of a true mother, that he will never forget your kindness, and that when he is a man, he will protect you as you protected him. Martha felt the last of her composure crumble. She had saved one child's life and, in doing so, had apparently changed the trajectory of her own. The boy who might have been her enemy had become her guardian. The father who might have been her killer had become her protector. As Running Bear prepared to leave, carrying his son carefully in his arms, he paused at Martha's door for one final exchange. There will still be war, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of inevitability. Too much has happened. Too much blood has been spilled for there to be peace between our people soon. But perhaps in the choices we make, in the mercy we show, we plant seeds for a different future. Martha nodded, understanding that she had been part of something larger than herself, a moment of grace in an otherwise brutal conflict. What's his name? She asked, looking at the boy who had changed her life. Little Wolf, Running Bear replied, though after this, he may need a new name. Perhaps Little Wolf, who was saved by the medicine woman. And with that, they were gone, the thunder of 50 horses carrying them back toward the wild places where her people and his would continue their ancient dance of violence and survival. But something had changed in the space between heartbeats, in the choice to heal rather than harm. Martha stood on her porch long after the dust had settled, Tom's rifle still in her hands, wondering at the strange ways Providence worked in the world. Weeks passed before Martha fully understood the magnitude of what had occurred. Word spread through the territory about the strange encounter at the Henderson place, growing with each telling until it became the stuff of legend. Some called her foolish, others blessed, but when Comanche raiders struck the Mitchell Ranch 20 miles north, they left a message carved into the gatepost. The medicine woman is protected. True to Running Bear's word, no harm came to Martha or her property. Her crops grew unmolested. Her livestock remained untouched by raiders who took freely from other spreads. She became a figure of curiosity and, in some quarters, resentment among settlers who couldn't understand why she alone seemed immune to Comanche vengeance. But Martha understood. She had chosen to see a human child rather than an enemy, had chosen healing over hatred, mercy over vengeance. In that choice, she had found something precious, a glimpse of what the world might look like if more people could see past the colors of war to the common humanity beneath. Years later, when the Comanche Wars finally ended and the great Chief Quanah Parker led his people onto the reservation at Fort Sill, Martha received an unexpected visitor. Little Wolf, now grown into a young man of obvious intelligence and character, came to her door dressed in white man's clothes, but carrying himself with the dignity of his heritage. I have not forgotten, he said simply, speaking English with careful precision. I am a teacher now at the school on the reservation, helping my people learn new ways while keeping the old wisdom alive. But I needed to come here first to thank the woman who saved my life and changed everything. They sat on Martha's porch as the sun set over the Texas plains, talking of the years between, of the changes that had reshaped both their worlds. Little Wolf told her of his father's death in the final battles, of his own struggle to find a path between the old ways and the new. He never forgot what you did, Little Wolf said as darkness gathered around them. In his final words, he spoke of the medicine woman who chose mercy, said it was proof that even in the darkest times, there are those who carry light. Martha wept then, for Tom and for Running Bear, for all the death and sorrow that had marked their time. But she wept too for the beauty of it, for the strange and wonderful ways that love could triumph over hatred, that mercy could plant seeds in the most unlikely soil. As Little Wolf prepared to leave the next morning, he pressed something into Martha's weathered hands, a small medicine bag crafted by his father's own fingers. "He made this for you," Little Wolf explained, "said that anyone who could heal the wounds between peoples deserved to carry medicine of her own." Martha held the precious gift against her heart, feeling the weight of all the years between that terrible morning when 50 warriors rode to her door and this moment of perfect grace. She had been afraid that day, certain she would die for her choice to save one small life. Instead, she had discovered that mercy, like wildfire, could spread far beyond its starting point, changing everything it touched. She stood on her porch long after Little Wolf disappeared over the horizon, Tom's presence almost tangible beside her in the morning air. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of children playing, the next generation growing up in a world slowly, gradually learning to choose healing over hatred. The medicine bag rested warm against her palm, a symbol of hope carried forward from the darkest of times. Martha Henderson had rescued a wounded Comanche child, and in doing so, had helped rescue something precious in the world itself. The possibility that even ancient enemies could find their way to understanding, one act of mercy at a time.